Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Ann Huang. I'm the Executive Director of World Arts West. My pronouns are she, her. Before we begin the program today, I want to acknowledge that today's program is taking place on the traditional, unceded traditional land of the Ramaytush Ohlone. Welcome to weekend 2 of the 45th Annual World Arts West Dance Festival. Good to see the artists in the audience here. This year's expanded festival format includes artist dialogues. This is the new program. Dance workshops. We stay for the dance workshop after the artist dialogue. And a full day of performances at the Presidio next Sunday. Close to 200 cultural artists who are all engaged in deep social change work will be performing. It's a free performance. Come and check us out at the Presidio next Sunday. For World Arts West is a 46-year-old arts organization that serves the largest world dance network in the United States. Yes. We advocate for cultural artists by providing capacity building artist service programs, live performance opportunities, and collective advocacy. In the last 5 years, World Arts West has undergone a deeply transformative equity journey. For the first time, our board, our staff, our festival production team are majority cultural artists that represent the diversity of the artist community we serve. The artists are us. We are the artists. After lots of deep listening in the community, we're rolling out different festival themes. This year, Dance is Activism. Next year, Dance, Health, and Healing. If you're not on our mailing list, please sign up our mailing list to hear more. We're always looking for program volunteers. Come and help us out. And also you can buy a t-shirt to support our organization. This year's festival theme, Dance as Activism, shares the power of cultural dance to challenge societal norms, preserve cultural heritage, and inspire social change. To meet the current historical moment, cultural artists are telling stories of resistance and revolution. Today's artist dialogue centers on the topic evolution and preservation, evolving traditional dance in contemporary times. I'd like to introduce our wonderful moderator for this conversation, Kiazi Malonga. Kiazi Malonga is a second-generation Congolese American born into a family of artists. He was first introduced to the Ngoma drum at age 2 by his father, the legendary Malonga Cascalord, world-renowned traditional drummer, dancer, choreographer from Congo, Brazzaville, and became the lead drummer of his father's dance company, Foi dia Congo, at age 16. Kiazi is a prolific musician. He also founded and runs Vanessa Energy, which aims to close the energy gap to Central Africa by supplying solar power energies. I'm also thrilled that Foi dia Congo will be closing our festival next Sunday. Please come and check them out. Please welcome my dear friend, Kiazi Malonga.
Thank you so much. Can you guys hear me? Yeah. It's great to be here. Thank you, Ann, for that wonderful introduction. It is a pleasure to be the moderator and to help kind of guide this conversation that we'll be having. So without further ado, I would like to start by introducing our panelists so we can get started. So first and foremost, we have one panelist that has traveled from afar to be here. So us who are based in the Bay Area, we need to give her a warm welcome. Ishita Mili is a Bengali American director, choreographer, educator, and iconoclast. She founded IMGE, a dance company that unravels cultural roots to thread together global stories with artists of diverse backgrounds. IMGE's holistic movement vocabulary encompasses dynamic imagery, mudra storytelling, and percussive footwork to confront social and cultural constructs. Join me in welcoming Ishita. Next up, Vanessa Sanchez is a Chicana dancer, choreographer, educator who focuses on community artists, traditional dance forms to emphasize voices and experiences of Latina, Chicana, and indigenous women and youth. Based here in San Francisco, round of applause. She is the executive director of La Mezcla, a rhythmic ensemble of women of color that explores historical narratives and social justice through tap dance, son jarocho, son jarocho, and Afro-Caribbean rhythms. Join me in welcoming Vanessa. Last but not least, also wearing green, like myself, our final panelist, Phillip Agyapong, a dance teacher and researcher from Ghana who currently lives here in California. At the University of Ghana, he earned his dance education by studying African dance forms from the rich cultural heritage and traditions of the Ga, Ewe, Fon, Akan, Dagomba, and many other ethnic groups that reside in West Africa. Currently, he teaches African neo-traditional dance forms, both theory and practice, African popular dance, and contemporary African dance at several universities here across the Bay Area. Join me in welcoming Phillip. I also want to say that I see a few dancers in the audience. Directly following this panel discussion, Phillip will be leading us in an Afro-pop movement workshop. So if you're feeling and inspired by our discussion, 1:30 to 2:30, stick around and we can move with Phillip. Thank you. How you guys doing?
Good.
That's good?
Doing good?
Nice. Thank you so much for joining. Again, just to recap briefly for the audience, you're here listening to Evolution and Preservation, the evolving of traditional dance in contemporary settings. So I would like this to be very much conversational. I'll kind of direct questions at each one of you, but feel free after one of our colleagues said or answer the question if you feel inspired to add. It'll be that way. So we'll run this portion of the discussion up until 1 p.m. and then we'll open up for questions. So if any of our discussions kind of beg comments and questions for you guys, we'll have that time at 1 p.m. So first up, Ishita. I'd like to know what's your thoughts around how does each cultural practice determine where, when an art form has crossed the line and is becoming too modern?
I don't have an easy answer for that really difficult question, but maybe to put some of my background in context is I trained in Bharatanatyam, a South Indian classical dance, using specifically the word classical, not necessarily traditional. Also Mayor Punch Cho, which is a type of East Indian dance, one that I would call traditional, not classical. And also Black American street dance, hip hop, popping, Vogue, and more. And so I'm constantly crossing lines all the time in my work, bringing a lot of those vocabularies together. And I think the more that I research and a lot of my practice is investigating how movement is connected across lines, and so how we can kind of move, or at least in my practice, move away from labels and find more unifying ways of how movement connects to our experience, despite where you come from and what race and what background. And so it's hard to describe sometimes when you watch something and you understand that the essence of its roots are there. That's a hard thing to like write down what that essence is. And so I've been in conflict in points in my career when someone says oh, well, you're wearing that and that, so that is not allowed in the thing. But then if you look in the history, actually that traditional practice's history has constantly evolved. And sometimes looking at tradition as an artifact of a time actually takes it out of its ability to move with time. And so I don't have, lines to define, but I think that when we understand the intentions of our past, then we can apply them to our current times to find what essence is relevant from the past, to then bring traditions, cultural practices, our experiences into the current times in the future.
No, thank you for that. That for me, quick comment, like in my own art, really digging into the purpose of ancestors and how art has kind of led and guided from a historical perspective. It's always helped me ground sharing a traditional art form and kind of an ever so changing present day. So I just wanted to let you know that I align with that. But Vanessa, Phillip, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I think first of all, we may want to probably get an idea of what tradition is, depending on which traditional area we are talking about. And of course, for me, I deal more in the West African movement systems. So, and I agree that traditional movements change with time. However, with contemporary time, there is always the battle back and forth between what is and where we want to go in terms of an artist's artistic liberty to pick different movements and then create different dance forms here and there. But of course, these traditional forms are there for specific reasons. And so within the African traditional space, there will be a definition of representation and then presentation, where they would say that presentation is the actual traditional dance that are performed within certain calendar events of the year. Because of course, when you look at the Akan people, their yearly calendar is not the same as the English, December to January to December. They have their own calendar, right? So within that, there is traditional forms, activities that happen, like the cleansing of the stool, which is called mudra, like funeral ceremonies, like, outdooring of a baby, right? And within these forms, there are traditional forms that inform that particular activity. Now, these specific forms are intended for specific purposes, and the value thereof represents that activity, right? Now, when an artist learns these dances and then want to create different things with it, for example, I go to this tradition, learn whatever dances you're doing for a funeral ceremony, for instance, and I want to use it to address maybe a concern in the society. Do I call it the same traditional dance as the people call it? Because when you talk about traditional dance back, again, you're talking about a particular event that has so many things in there. And it's not just, people are not just looking at the movement, people are not just looking, it is not just dance in space and time. You're talking about the philosophy of the people, you're talking about the history of the people, you're talking about the intent of that event, all right? But of course, when I go pick that movement and I want to create something with it on stage, I'm not looking at all those things that is pertaining to the society. I'm looking at something different, all right? So then, for the respect of the society, I may call it new traditional forms, all right? Because I'm not really referring to that same thing. Yes, I'm picking movement vocabularies from that movement, or from that dance to create my thing, right? So I think the custodians of those traditions have the right to say that, okay, hey, you're messing up our dance. As an artist, I also have the artistic liberty to pick those movements to do whatever I want, but I don't have to call it the same name. Right? Because if I call it the same name and they are calling their dance the same name, they have all the rules to say, yeah, you're causing cultural appropriation and all that, right? So I think that terminologies are also very important in this space, knowing, kind of respecting the people and telling them that, okay, hey, Yeah, I'm picking movement from here, but I'm calling it this and I'm using it for this purpose. And I'm not necessarily representing exactly what you do in the tradition.
Oh, thank you for that. Vanessa, you had some thoughts?
I'm going to keep it short. But when I think of this question, I really, what comes to me a lot specifically in the dance forms that I work within, tap dance, which I think a lot of people in modern times don't consider that a traditional or cultural dance form, but it 100% is, like born out of Black resistance in the United States. Son Jarocho, which is a tradition from Veracruz, Mexico, and specifically the work I do within Son Jarocho is based on the Fandango tradition. So Fandango essentially means party. And Fandangos Jarochos are gathering of community in which you play, dance, sing Son Jarocho. It is not the same as folklorico. And so that's the thing I always kind of have to reiterate. I think folklorico, Mexican folklorico is a beautiful tradition. I've never trained in it. And I so what I base our Son Jarocho traditions on is actually guided musical improvisation. And when I say musical, our footwork is the drum. Right, so we are actually instruments within this community gathering. And then a lot of work that I do is rooted in Afro-Cuban, Afro-Brazilian traditions. And for me, I think my first kind of guidance to kind of stay within those realms of what tradition is looked at throughout history is the connection with my teachers and the connection with the culture bearers that are passing it down and continuing to be in constant conversation with them. And not only as consultants, but as mentors for myself and for the artists that I work with. And then for me, I very much think rhythmically. And so we look at the tradition of what these dance forms, how they exist within community. They all come from community, all coming from kind of like this relationship of like a circle, everyone kind of working together in a circle. And in my mind, there's the element of, are we staying within the traditional rhythmic patterns? That's where my brain goes to when I'm thinking specifically about, are we crossing the line? I initially go to like, is this within the pattern? For example, we all know La Bamba, right? Richie Valens made it popular. That's actually a Son Jarocho that's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years old and has infinite amounts of verses that can be sung. Outside of the popular recorded version that we know. And so when I use, for example, the rhythms of La Bamba and I'm pairing it with tap dance, in doing that, I'm making sure that we're respecting the percussive traditions of what La Bamba calls for before adding on another percussive layer of tap dance. And so I think for me, that's kind of where I try to find my guidance in terms of staying within the tradition, but also expanding it a little bit.
Perhaps.
Let me chip in something small over here. As soon as we pick dances from its roots, right? And as you said, if you had, stayed for over 200 years plus, whatever, year in, year out, little by little, different people's experiences affect and influence the dances, right? And as artists, one thing that I see that I actually, realize is that we break boundaries almost every time as soon as we bring the dances from the original roots to the classroom, to the theater, to wherever. Let's just take a traditional dance by the Akan people, which is called Aduwa. Aduwa, in some traditions, is among the Ashanti kingdom. Sometimes before it's being displayed, there's a pouring of libation, which of course is part of the event. There is a particular tune that is being played, all right? And we can have all the musical instruments, the rhythm right, all these things right. But as soon as I pick it up, there are so many elements that I'm taking off, all right? Because when Aduwa is played, Aduwa is timeless. When Aduwa is playing at a funeral, you don't say that, okay, hey, you've played for 10 minutes, okay, that's enough. No, you play until the performance or the performers are satisfied, until satisfaction is actually, established within that period of performance. When we bring it to the stage, we are looking at about 5 minutes. The organizers will say, hey, we have 5 minutes to perform this show, and then that is it. So what is the artist going to do? You have to compress every single thing, and probably you're not looking at the relevance of the dance to the people, but probably just for aesthetic's sake. Right? You're looking at certain movements that are aesthetically appealing, to the audience. So, are you fully represented? And the answer no, all right? So you're just picking elements, and even the rhythm, all right? Are you responding? Are you following like this before you start? For instance, if there is something like that, you're not. So you are cutting out a whole lot. So I see that new traditional dance forms cut a lot of things from the original forms. And so we keep breaking boundaries each and every day. But of course, it's more like the explanation of what this is and what the tradition is. I think that is what makes the difference. So that you don't feel like, okay, hey, you are kind of messing up our dance or breaking boundaries all the time.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the discussion is taking flow because they're already answering second and third questions that are curated. So awesome. To the curation team and then to the panelists for discussing. But no, I think, Ishita, I want to come back to you because both Vanessa and Phillip shared a bit about basically what main elements must remain and stand the test of time in order for an art form to stay true to its tradition while simultaneously being relevant to new generations. So for you, what does that look like? What does that feel like? How are you actively displaying it?
Yeah. And to that, I definitely don't identify as a traditional practitioner. I'm not a Bharatanatyam dancer. I trained in Bharatanatyam for like 25 plus years. I don't identify as a Bharatanatyam dancer, nor my Punch Chow. Got a grant from the New Jersey government to study that intensely under a guru. I definitely still don't identify as a Punch Chow practitioner. For me, it's all about looking back into these traditions that I have shared experience with and finding out what's relevant to my generation, taking those elements of tradition, leaving behind ones that I don't relate to anymore, that I don't feel are relevant, and creating something new out of that. So I think that's kind of my push and pull of identifying what is relevant and not. So if I take Bharatanatyam, which is really one of my foundational practices that I grew up in, I've been having to unlearn a lot of the tradition that I've learned in the last couple of years, once I've been able to more honestly connect to its history, which has some problems in it. And then so for me, there's a negotiation to, what happens when traditions are problematic? Then do we uphold them just for the sake of for the honesty of that's what has been passed down to me, that's what my guru taught me, so I owe that practice, but then there's harm that gets passed down through that. So then what happens? So now we have to pick and choose, okay, so what's relevant to create safe and equitable spaces? Bharatanatyam's original practitioners were hereditary dancers that were cast out of society during colonization and Indian nationalism. It wasn't called Bharatanatyam. It had different cultural layers than it does now. Then upper caste Brahmins, I mean, this is a very, very abbreviated history, took that practice, reshaped it, de-exotified it, added geometry to it, added different rhythmic patterns to it, tried to make it appropriate for upper caste class Brahmin girls to do, and excluded its original practitioners from. And that's the predominant Indian classical dance that all Indian kids in the US grow up learning, because that's how we are able to connect with our roots, but that's actually kind of a constructed reality. Whoa. That's like a lot to negotiate. So now, and Bharatanatyam therefore is now sort of a new tradition, a new classical dance. That's a new word. We don't have the word classical in Indian dance. And it's also a form of appropriation of someone else's history. And so for me, I look at all of that, I'm like, okay, there's no giving this back. I mean, we're talking like hundreds of years, now of all this stuff happening. Okay, I love, what do I love about Bharatanatyam that I can take from this form and create something new out of it, and while still negotiating with that history? Those are the types of questions that I'm asking when I'm trying to now create my new practice.
I think my mind is stretching your question a little bit outside of technique and really looking at the original location where these dance forms originated. I said that twice, but you know, like where these traditions come from. So with La Mezcla, we do a lot of community engagement activities, we do a lot of classes, but primarily as a dance company, I create dance theater productions that are performed on a proscenium stage. You know, there's the audience, we're on the stage, there's lighting, there's video. And so we're bringing together different dance forms to tell contemporary and complex histories and stories of social justice. And so I say this because just in that in and of itself, as you were mentioning, we're already kind of breaking the tradition because we're putting it on the stage, right? These traditions are made to be done within community. Everything that the work is based on community engagement. And so for myself, in this context of like what elements are important to maintain, right, when we're talking about traditional cultural dance and music forms, I look at the community element, right? And so in our productions, it's really important for me as the choreographer and director to find a space in which we break the fourth wall and engage with the audience so that they're part of the experience. You know, they're not just watching us blankly, but that we're actually calling them into being part of the percussive conversation, part of the rhythms that we're making while we're on stage. And in addition to that, with so La Mezcla has had the great opportunity of touring nationally and internationally. And I'm specifically thinking of our show Pachuquismo, which is a show that uses tap dance, son jarocho, and live jazz music to tell the history of 1940s Pachucas during the Zoot Suit riots. And so in the process of that tour, we're looking at like, great, we're going to all these communities where we're not part of the community, but rather than showing up and saying like, just watch us, you know, I feel like that's kind of stunting what the dance traditions call for. It's very important for us to hold a traditional son jarocho fandango either leading up or following an engagement, so that way we're able to actually connect with the audience. We're actually able to create a community engagement space attached to the production and still calling back to the actual tradition of what we're doing on stage.
Thank you for that. I see you have something. So I want to kind of push the discussion along, and hopefully it'll still be. Yeah, it's okay. This is great discussions here, great responses. I wanted to introduce the question of gender and what role that plays in the evolution of traditional dances. So, Phillip, if you feel like you maybe able to speak a bit to gender and its influence.
Okay. Maybe before I do that, let me just a little very important. You know, I'm very careful when I'm, you know, discussing traditional forms versus contemporary literature on our dances, especially, you know, coming from the West African region, because, of course, people said our dances were barbaric, right? So what else would they have, what good things would they have actually said about our traditional dance forms? And especially when I don't understand certain traditional forms, I'm very hesitant, you know, into going into it, talking about the value that I want versus the value that I don't want, you know, just throw the ones that I don't want away, blah, 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 you know, because of those narratives. And so, as we have all agreed, you know, traditions change with time. And so a dance that, for example, was created during a period of war, as time goes on, there are still wars going on. There are still things that people are battling with. It might not be physical war, man to man. It could be malaria. It could be hunger. It could be whatever. And so the dances in its own way and the people will tune the whole experience towards finding that current experience that people have, right? And so if it was a war, of course, nobody wants war. Doesn't mean that war is irrelevant, or that idea, fighting against maybe a foe within yourself or whatever, doesn't mean that that is not good, maybe not, right? And so we channel that idea, which perhaps is not good, into something good that is relevant to our experience today. And so I'm very careful when it gets into art forms and what I want versus what I don't want, right? Now, coming back to what we're talking about with gender, I'm sure a lot of people who have had experience with African traditional forms have the realization, or have realized that African traditional forms are very, very binary. We have male dancers, female dancers, we We have dances for kids, we have dances for adolescents, dances for older people, even ritual dance forms. And all these dances are set within the natural philosophy of the people, of the, and especially I can say for the Akan traditional groups, which resonate with most traditional groups in Africa. I have not really seen any evidence of probably pre-colonial era where, there are switches in there. Of course, currently after colonization, and of course going back to what is relevant now, there are some dances that perhaps were only men. Now you can see women performing those dances as well. You can see even ritual forms, some ritual forms which were sacred in those times. Those dances were performed far in the forest. Nobody, if you're not within a particular cult or particular lineage, you are not allowed to see these dance forms. They are now, some of them are now being performed on stage, right? So, on less specifics, I would say that for most of the traditional forms, it depends on what the intent is and how relevant it is to society today. And of course, that is an example of how society have changed and shaped some of these dances. Because previously the man was the police in the society, was the firefighter, especially among the Akans was the soldier and all those things. And the women's role in community was the continuity of life. So they brought life into the society. Children had their role to play, and so when they are born, they are born. Either they follow the footsteps of their parents and then identify who they are in that process, which of course is relevant in naming ceremony. So when the child is born and they're doing the naming ceremony, they test the honesty of the child by saying that, okay, if you see water, say it is water. If you see honey, say it's honey. And of course, within that process, a lot of things, who the identity of the child is actually built, right? And they believe that all this has been given by, God or their spiritual being, all right? So it makes it very complex within that space to even, kind of go beyond certain rules or certain lines. Especially when you talk about the ritual forms. However, some ritual dance forms, a woman can actually be possessed by a male spirit, and that is within the process of performance or possession. All right, because possession comes within a particular time, and as soon as that is over, of course, that person goes back to their original identity. All right, so these things interplay within the traditional process as well.
Got it. Ladies, any thoughts around gender, comments around that?
I'll share a small story. Lighter Punch Cho, which is an East martial Indian dance that started in the Maharaja courts in the 1800s. Courts, military, you can imagine it's men. The first woman to practice Lighter Punch Cho was a Jewish American woman in the 1960s. And now I get to practice because of it. Isn't that something to think about? I guess another intersection with gender and how I grew up with Bharatanatyam, which is definitely very gender divided, is that, especially in the hyper kind of religiosity of how the dance form had been constructed, is there's very female goddess characters. There's not that many of them, only one warrior goddess, Kali Durga Ma. And then there's like thousands of male gods who have all the power and start all the wars, and it was so strong. I liked to dance very strong as a kid. So I remember when I was 15 and I was getting ready for my Anagetram, and I would have to switch between roles because I was small, I was short, so naturally I would always be asked to play the female characters when I was a better man, but I wasn't womanly enough, or I wasn't feminine enough. And at 15, that was really led to a lot of identity kind of like crises for me. And so kind of bringing back tradition to modernity, have again taken what I like and don't like, and try to kind of blur boundaries when they're not helpful constructs. Yeah, that's it.
Can I say something quickly? Do we have more questions? Well, this is an interesting perspective for me because like La Mezcla, I started it as a platform to share the stories of women across different identities and cultures. And so I'm going to specifically look at tap dance and son jarocho in this answer. But it's really interesting when you look back at the tradition, the history of tap dance. There's a lot of dudes. There's a lot of dudes. You look back and have you ever seen the movie Tap? Yeah,
Yes.
classic. There's that amazing scene where they're trading and they're trading bars and they're taking solos. That's how tap dance originated. It was very much kind of this organic improvisation and people were making rhythms and challenging one another. It's all men. It's all men in that space. And so there's actually a tap dancer based in New York named Ayodali Casal right now, and she's doing a lot of research on the women of tap dance traditions throughout history. And uncovering how so many of them, when we're looking back at, when tap dance kind of became what it was through vaudeville and all of these different spaces in which tap was being performed, women were often just not seen as like, oh, they can't trade bars like the men. They can't, which was never, that's not the case. We can trade just as, just as much. And so it's been a really interesting process of following her research and finding all of these women, these female tap dancers throughout history, and just saying their names and bringing them into the space because they were holding it down for us long before, I think a lot of female tap dancers had a platform to tell their stories and share what work they can do, And looking at the history of son jarocho, when I look specifically at the tradition of the fandango, I don't know, is anyone here familiar with the son jarocho fandango? And so this is a tradition in which the community gathers. There are musicians all around. There's something called a tarima in the middle of the space, and that's the platform that people dance on. And so when you're looking at the tradition, for example, I mentioned La Bamba. La Bamba, I've been at fandangos where La Bamba lasted 3 hours. It goes, like you were saying, it goes until the people are done. Like it goes until people stop going up and dance, because you can go up and dance on the tarima during the instrumental parts. You can trade dancers, right? So people are going up and dancing. Now, traditionally, La Bamba is danced between a man and a woman. The same as like a son called alcolas. It's always a man and a woman, or one man and 4 women. And then there's sones like La Morena or La Bruja, also traditional sones that are all, they're called sones de mujer. So it's all women that dance those. And so it's been really interesting in recent years within the tradition of the fandangos, like looking at the campos, the countryside of Veracruz, people starting to challenge those gender norms, right? And so people dancing the parts they identify with, rather than being like, oh, La Morena or La Guacamaya is all women. Like if someone identifies with like, I feel that I identify with what this represents, they'll go up and dance. And it's been interesting in how it has been accepted with a lot of traditional fandangueros and traditional soneros. And so that, for La Mezcla is something, I mean, we're doing a lot. We're doing La Bamba, we're doing La Sapteado, we're doing Alcolas, but we're doing it all women on stage. And so that kind of concept coming out of the fandango to push the gender norms is a big conversation right now within the tradition of son jarocho.
Nice. I'll just share really quickly just some thoughts on that same topic. As Ann mentioned, I grew up primarily in the Bay Area, second generation Congolese, from a culture primarily on the music and drumming side that's dominated by most males. There's certain rituals and settings where only women drum, but the typical drum that we play standing up that's pretty much male dominated. And I don't know for what reason, but my father was inspired late 80s, early 90s to create an only women drumming group. And I was met with so much resistance here in the Bay Area. And they won like awards. The group was called Jata Jata. To where like it was one almost like physical altercation of a dude who was just really, really upset about it before a performance. And it was just like, and I was told about this story from my father and also people who witnessed it. It's just amazing how people are set in certain ways And he was, I think, one of the inspirations was really just to break down those barriers. Art is healing, it's always evolving, and so that was just a little addition that I wanted to share with that. And moving forward, just 11 more minutes roughly around this discussion. So if you have questions or anything that's kind of bubbling for you guys, just get them ready because we'll open up the floor in a bit. But I consider myself in this space second generation Congo as a culture bearer, right? And the way that I express and share my art is definitely directly related to my ancestry in art, but I'm also aware that I'm reimagining and representing in new ways. So I say that to say, regardless of how we are kind of considered along the realm of like how traditional, contemporary, how we play with those blurred areas, how do, oftentimes, because we come from cultures that are thousands of years old, that have history and tradition, that have led, guided, and built civilizations and lives, how do we educate and communicate with purists or traditionalists that believe really in that lineage, hundreds and thousands of years old, that don't approve of the current forms or ignore, kind of the way that we're reimagining or presenting our art. So I will continue this.
Yeah, this is a constant, it's a constant reality and question for me. It used to weigh heavily more on me earlier when I was still really under schools, especially in Padafakiam, and I think I've always had conflict with my elders, especially with kind of that historical context that I talked a little bit about earlier about Padafakiam's like problematic historical roots. When you grow up with the preciousness of tradition as your whole upbringing, that information can kind of shatter your reality. And that is a lot. Not everyone is ready for their realities to be shattered and don't want them to be. And so there have been times of fruitful conversations, and there's certainly been times of not fruitful conversations. And I think I'm in an interesting point in my contemporary career where, 10 years later after starting my journey of being a rule breaker, so to say, being a rule breaker when you're just trying to express yourself but not being considered a rebel is I'm not trying to be a rebel, I'm just trying to be. So if my being is being a rebel, I guess that's what it is, but I'm just trying to live my reality. And it's weird that in itself is offensive. And so I'm at a point now where 10 years later, the very beginning critics of my career are now coming back and they're like, oh, I think you're onto something. And that's sometimes the cost of really committing to ideas that are not the norm at the time. And then I think that is how new tradition is made, and that's something that I seek to do. And I think my rule of thumb of the how is if communications happen with kindness, then I'm willing to explain. If you come at me like, you're disrespectful, and like, how dare you, there's no conversation to be had. But if you ask me, hey, why are you doing that the way that you are? Normally, I don't see people wearing shoes when they do any steps of that sort. Then I'll give you an answer, and then we get to have a productive discussion. But if hostility is the mechanism of protecting tradition for whatever, beliefs that you have, then I don't really think that there's a conversation to be had.
100%. I think there's a lot of, it's a lonely road, and I think you made a really, really great point that every tradition starts somewhere, right? And so just giving energy and strength. And to everybody, right? Because we all are kind of reimagining and kind of walking on and walking. So when you feel like I'm just trying to be, and that in and of itself ruffles feathers, well, just keep being, Vanessa, any thoughts?
Yes, I'm trying to figure out how to word them. I think the perspective I usually come from before even getting to those conversations, and I'm a student in all of these traditions forever and ever. I will continue learning and training in them. And also, I often say that the work that I do, both as an artist on my own and teacher on my own, but also within that mezcla, it is inspired by these traditions. So I also am not, I'm very careful to not claim like we are doing, this, but I often like, oh, this is inspired by the traditions from, this region. But it's actually been really interesting looking again at the tradition of Son Jarocho, because a lot of what I do is really rooted in there. My family is from Veracruz, Mexico, so I was born here, but my family's from there, so I feel a very deep connection to that tradition specifically. So I stay really connected and rooted with my maestros and maestras in Mexico, and I have to name them. I just do Laura Rebolloso, Andres Flores, Benito Cortez, Rubio Seguera, and many, many more who I work with very closely, and they are culture bearers of the tradition, And it's been very interesting, their openness to the vision of what I wanted to do with the work. And a lot of them actually are like, you want to do a La Bamba about the Pachucas? I want to write the verses, So they actually work with me to use the traditional form of the sones, but put in new lyrics to actually tell the historical context of like what we're doing with our work. Versus people here, like maybe, young people who are kind of going into the tradition through fundingos in the United States, being very closed off to not wanting to explore it. And so I've actually had this very interesting process of like my teachers saying like, well, we think this is great, so keep doing it, we'll work with others and understanding why this is important. And so it's been a really interesting process of that actually kind of, my maestros are given the blessing where it's actually kind of my generation was like, you shouldn't be doing that, that's not traditional. So that's been a process. And I think for me, when that comes up, the way I try to talk about it or explain it or be in conversation with them is I'm bringing these different forms together to tell a story of those who maybe don't 100% identify with either. I'm Mexican American, I identify as Chicana, I was born in the US. And so, I've been like, in terms of being a dancer, kind of in between, Mexico and the US. Here I was always the Mexican tap dancer, but in the US, in Mexico, I'm always the gringa, right? And so this was kind of my way of being like, well, if I can bring together these two percussive dance forms to create this new polyrhythmic conversation about my experience and the experience of my community as being Mexican American, I use that as a starting point to kind of give a reason why to people who maybe aren't as open to bringing different forms together.
Awesome. So, Phillip, I'm going to turn to you and ask you, and I'm going to come back around, but if you have any thoughts around just how you communicate to purists, and then also that, really quick if you can, what's the legacy that you are hoping to leave to future generations through the art that you share, practice, and live on a daily basis?
Yeah, I think that the African traditional movement systems, West African traditional movement system, I would say that among the various ethnic groups, knowing the intent of these dance forms are very important, and I think that that is the most important thing, legacy that I want to leave behind, to let people know why these dances were done. Why is it only female? Is it because the female is inferior in society? That's why they perform that, or is it because of something else? Why are men performing this dance? Is it because men are just bullied? That's why they're just performing this dance. Within that social contract, what were the ideas behind performing these movements? Is it just for entertainment? Is it just for time and space? Is that why they were performing this dance? But for them to understand the root cause or the root value of these dances, of who the woman is, who the man is, who the child is, who the older person is. Why do they have to transition from childhood to adulthood? Why do they have to perform marriage in bed, puberty rites, marriage, title taking, death, even in funerals, right? What is the relevance of these? What are the intents? And build that understanding. Of course, as contemporary people, we our current needs will definitely influence the dance we do. Like myself and CK Lazeko. CK Lazeko, I'm sure most of you may know him. He comes from a particular tradition that I'm not sure whether the narrative is he was around the time the dances were created or he inherited. It's either of them. So when he is actually, teaching this particular dance form, there are certain uniqueness that comes and that some kind of attachment that comes with these dance forms. I am not an Ewe, I'm an Akan, all right? I don't understand the language, right? Because the music itself is a language that has been, put in those tunes. And so, anytime I'm teaching and he's around, I'm on the fence, right? Because I'm actually teaching from his culture, and of course, he wants the culture to stay in a particular way because that is his identity, all right? That is where he comes from. He speaks volumes just more than anybody who is not from that tradition trying to just pick and choose what they want within that particular element. When you don't fully understand that, all right? So of course, when I'm doing contemporary dance forms, I tell them, okay, this is choreography on stage. It is not necessarily to reflect any roots value of the dance. I'm just interested in this movement and I want to use that to create something. But if I go beyond and say that, okay, I'm doing traditional dance, then that's what the problem is. Then you are rubbing shoulders with the traditional or the custodians of the tradition, telling them that, okay, I'm an Akan, you are an Ewe, but I won't try to do your thing as much as you were doing. And then that's where they will have a problem with. However, people who don't understand these will still have issues with it, especially when they see me undulating on stage and I'm not doing it the way, I'm not sitting well, I'm not applying the spine as well as I should. Yeah, they're going to be concerned because that is their identity. All right, they've created an identity for themselves, and the movements are value systems that are created within the culture. I am from a different generation. I can do whatever I want, but I don't have to disrespect their traditional forms. Right. So, so long as there is that definition of terms and understanding, I think that and for legacy's sake, I just let them understand the reasons why these movements are there, the reasons why these group of people perform these and all that.
Great. Vanessa, in terms of legacy, what legacy would you like to leave for future generations?
Legacy is a big word. I see the work that I do as being much bigger than me, and I'm but a vessel that these stories come through. And so I think for me, the work is really rooted in telling stories of underseen and undervalued communities, underseen and undervalued peoples within our society, and that is what I bring the traditional dance forms and contemporary histories together to tell. That's why I create these stories. That's why we put them on the stage. And so, I think what I would hope to leave for people to take from our work is that our stories, coming from a long line of laborers and domestic workers and farm workers, our stories deserve the same stages and platforms as other stories that have been featured on professional dance stages around the world for generations. Our stories deserve the same space, and we deserve to be in the same space as they have in predominantly white spaces.
Great, thank you. Ishita.
I am concerned about building a truly global movement, vocabulary, a new way of moving, to create new futures, to imagine better worlds that everyone can live in. Myself, my collaborators, my students, my audiences, where anyone can enter this work and find pieces of themselves and things that they can relate to, and then also be able to have new tools to relate to other people who they might not have otherwise. And I hope that value is something that will last through time and be something that is helpful.
Thank you. This has been a great discussion. You all have learned so much and partaking in now. I would like to open up the floor. Hopefully it's been as thought-provoking for you all as it has been for me. Are there any questions or comments? Yes, one question in the back.
Yeah, I'm still struggling to how to phrase this, but we're talking Yes, so we were talking earlier about what modern or contemporary dance is, how that influences or gets incorporated into more traditional and classical. And then Ishita recently just mentioned the globalization, right? That global, like integrating many different forms. So, given that there's this sort of trading of movement styles and techniques, do you think that would pose a threat to not sound like a fundamentalist, but cultural or the integrity of the traditional forms, or do you think it's a boon or something that's just inevitable? And if you need to clarify, let me know. I was a little rambly.
Yeah, so if I'm following you correctly, are you talking about the evolution and progression of movement and how that either takes away from or
Yes.
supports tradition or
Yeah,
the
so
integrity of a
with
tradition?
more modern techniques sort of get incorporated and more of those old vestiges are cast off. Do you think that is going to be will they be able to maintain their cultural identity?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I totally understand. And yeah, I mean, I think it's really a dicey thing that's kind of out of our control. I think you could see it on the internet. There's all the kids doing all the kinds of dances, pulling all the influences from all over the place. That reality is like right now of the questioning of integrity of the past and how it relates to the now. Something that I hear a lot is, oh, I don't usually like fusion, but I like what you're doing and I don't know why. And I think that what it comes down to is making sure that no matter what, you go back into the past and understand what the origins are in order to be able to build onto legacy with integrity. Even if you are changing it, even if you are making something entirely new, you have to genuinely understand why things were the way they were. That's at least how I approach movement. I would never, or I think, especially as a practitioner or someone who borrows the culture of Black American dance and hip hop and Black street culture, you can understand and watch if someone understands grooves because it comes from a communal understanding of sharing. And when I think that's like one of the most common kind of styles that people are quick to enter. But when someone's really gone into the community, into the honest practice of street dance to understand the roots of why those forms have started in order to build anything else from the original legacy of that. Yeah, I don't have an easy answer.
When you look at some of the traditional forms that we have, and just as she said, some dances, when you look at a video, for example, Doa dance, as performed in maybe 100 years back versus 50 years back versus 2024, you will see differences in those traditional dances because their current environment, their current struggles, challenges, influence and affect the dance, okay? And so when we talk about preservation, I would say preservation is within a specific period of time. That's my theory. Because how well can you preserve a particular style for a very long time? Because probably 70 years I'm gone, my successor is coming with his or her own influences, style, ideology. At the University of Ghana, we've had experiences where one traditional dance form, somebody was left-handed, and so the person tilted the body towards the left side. Somebody came and that was right-handed, and the person tilted the body towards the right side. And so there are these challenges. Now, even when you go to some of our traditional dances, there are popular dances that are creeping into it in court, like at the court, the chief's palace, right? Where that space is supposed to be very sacred in respect to, holding those traditions. They are allowed to certain limits, all right? However, there are rules with these dances. Of course, as artists, I can break those rules again. As soon as I move the dance, I've broken all the rules already. But, for example, if I'm doing the Adowa dance, I'm not able to take my hand behind my back Because if there is a chief in front, it's an insult to that chief. So if there is a contemporary African dance, hip-hop dance, Afro-pop, and I'm doing the dance, I'm doing the Adwa dance, and I try to do that movement, of course, right there and then, they're going to put me to order because that movement goes against the tradition. However, if I need a different movement is introduced and it doesn't really go against the tradition, maybe the laws of the land, sometimes it's allowed. And so this is how sometimes new movement creeps into the tradition and then it absorbs it as it goes along. How come some sacred dances have become, more social dances now? Because, probably it could be that the chief priest got converted into Christianity and so doesn't perform the dance again. Or the priestess became a Muslim and so doesn't perform the dance again. Or the person became an atheist and thought that, all these things are irrelevant. And so, and probably, probably different ideas. Somebody becomes so creative that, they want to employ. But the tradition bearers, the custodians, it's not just one person. It is the society. It is the chief, the king, the queen, the elders of the society. They hold those traditions. So when things are coming in, they're able to sieve through. Okay, yeah, this can go. Okay, no, this can go. If you want to go and do your own thing like Afropop breaks almost all the rules in traditional forms. Because you don't, of course, unless the chief demands it, you don't perform Afropop at the chief's palace for a particular traditional routine or event. I don't know whether it helps. But.
I do, but if you want to move on.
No, it's okay. No, yes.
I think that's a tricky question because my intention with bringing different traditional dance forms and music forms together is to kind of encourage the new generation to then want to learn more about where it came from. So a tool that we use a lot is when we have a show, we might also, a week later offer like, oh, now there's a Son Jarocho master in town, come take a free class and like get an understanding of where this tradition comes from. In this work, we're using a lot of elements of Afro-Cuban tradition. Here's a free class with my maestra, Susana Arenas, where you can learn where this comes from. So we try to kind of, in peaking, maybe like getting people interested in the dance forms that they're seeing on the stage that are brought together, then offer a space where they can kind of identify where the roots of it comes from to kind of encourage them to then, train and study within the tradition as well. So that's a tool that we try to use to kind of make it clear where a lot of the work that we do comes from.
Are there any other questions, comments? Yes?
I'm wondering within all of your work where the spiritual, energetic, or ancestral pieces come in.
The question was, within all of our work, where is the spiritual, ancestral element? Where does that come in?
Yeah. So I would say that within African traditional dance forms, and especially the West African region, and of course it resonates with the rest of cultures in Africa, different dances have different purposes. There are ritual dance forms, there are social dances, there are war dances, I know, of course, when we talk about ritual dances, it has direct context. So, and even for the ritual forms, there are specific lineages. Especially within the Akan tradition, there are specific lineages. You can't just walk in and then say that, okay, I want to perform the Akan dance, right? There are repercussions with that. And so if you're not within that lineage, sometimes you might not have that experience, that spiritual encounter. When somebody is doing a Kpanlogo dance, it has less to do with spirituality. And Kpanlogo dance actually evolved, during the 1950s, thereabout, when Ghana got its first independence, right? Because it was a moment where people, and especially the amateur dance group, wanted to celebrate the occasion of regaining their independence. And so movements that were created, which of course were also identifies with the people. For instance, the Ghana people closer to the coastal areas. So the movement that were created actually indicated the occupation of the people. You know, you will see twisting and turning, of course, in the sandy grounds. Because remember, within African traditions, the geographical location of people affects and influences the dance they perform. So people in the hilly areas, people in a very vast land, people in the savanna areas, all these things affect if you interrogate the movement. So some dances are just social dances that does not have any direct, spiritual identity. But for the ritual ones, for the war dances, because when people were going to war, it's not just your physical body. You have to put some things in your body. You have to bat some leaves. You have to go to the priest or priestess's court, to empower yourself spiritually in order to fortify yourself to go. So all those dances are there. If you're talking about that kind of energy that comes within people, of course, the performance of African dance, depending on which area you're talking about, it comes with that electrifying power and energy. But in terms of connecting to the Supreme Being, there are specific dances that addresses that, and the dancer have to warm themselves up in that space. You can't just just go in there, And that dance, in those dances specifically, not everybody is allowed. Kwanlogo, when you hear the Kwanlogo drum and you're in Ghana, you can just jump in there. Even if you don't know how to dance, people are going to clap for you, smile. But when you talk about ritual forms, that is a different aspect where, people have to go through. I normally say they have to find the correct frequency. All right, so you're looking at the vertical and then the horizontal. All right, your vertical connection, and of course, socially. All right, who you are in the society also influence that. Yeah.
I think, number one, I really love that reference of like vertical and horizontal connection. That's something that's going to stay with me after this talk. I don't know if I relate to the ancestral connection in the way that I think is a common way of talking about work these days. I come from a really Bengali family. The root of Bengal is hard to describe as Indian. My parents and my grandparents are technically from Bangladesh, and labels and it's all a little complicated. And I am not from the descendants of Bharatanatyam, quite far from it. Mayurabhanj Cho is kind of adjacent. All to say that the cultural practices that I've embodied in and iterated off of are things that are not necessarily specifically connected to who I am, but Bengali arts is a very rich kind of cultural landscape. I grew up in a really artistic family. I have my cousin in the audience who is one of my many cousins who all went really deep into Bharatanatyam and dance and culture. My dad is a professional musician while also being like a finance bro. And my uncle is a professional choreographer in India. And he was like one of my first mentors, one of the first people who brought together classical, folk, contemporary, African dance influences, built his own movement vocabulary, had all of the repercussions to it, and now what he does is considered traditional. And I had that as a mentor. And have, watched, borrowed, looked into, trained in many practices. And I think that now my relationship to spirituality in my movement is really connected to nature, if I had to kind of describe it. Something that I think goes beyond everything, and that is true to time, and is also something that that anyone can enter in and understand. So that's kind of where I've arrived to after a lot of different types of influences. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you. I think within the work I do with La Mezcla, for me, I see connections in specific stories that we're telling through the work. And just to give a few examples, as someone who comes from training in Afro-Cuban and Afro-Brazilian traditions in a secular format, I do feel a deep connection to the power of the Orisha within those traditions. And specifically looking at like kind of ancestral lineages, I do the work often to tell stories that have been untold throughout history. And so, you know, when looking at the work of our show Pachuquismo, it's deeply rooted in very specific stories of Pachucas from the 1940s. A lot of who are ancestors, most of them who are ancestors now. And so there's this really deep connection. I did not know a woman named Amelia Venegas, who is a highlighted story in the production. She was a Pachuca in the 1940s, and I didn't know her, but her story really resonated with me. And so it was really important to not only create a piece inspired by her, but actually put her picture up there and say her name and like recognize the importance and significance of her story, because so many people, don't know who she is. And you know, connecting with that as well in our show Ghostly Labor, I didn't know Carmelita Torres, who was a 17-year-old maid in Juarez who started the bath riots protesting the gas baths that Mexican workers had to take every 8 days to cross into the US. But her story and her movement has gone undertold. And so it is, I feel, my responsibility to bring her onto the stage and bring all of the maids who fought with her onto the stage through the work that we're doing. And so in that sense, it's much bigger than me. It's much bigger than any of us that are on the stage, but we're actually, in that sense, connecting with this really deep ancestral lineage. It's really interesting. One of the dancers in the company, they tease me a lot because I love purple. You see my hair? I just love purple. And so one of the dancers asked, this was probably like a year ago when we were on tour, and they were like, why are all our costumes red and purple? Is it because you love red and purple? And I was like, well, I do love red and purple. But I actually related the power and strength and resilience of the Pachucas with Oya. Like that was kind of how I related it through kind of this spiritual ancestral lineage. And so for me, the way that I embodied that on stage was by having color themes of the costumes related to Oya's color across different cultural traditions. For our work, Ghostly Labor, I spent years volunteering with farm worker organizations and domestic work organizations. That was a really, really powerful experience, but I directly connected some of those experiences with kind of these ancestral lineages of the Orisha. I spent a lot of time with Brussels sprout farmers in Half Moon Bay, and I bet you guys don't know this, but they just straight up have machetes and they're just chopping like all day long, like till your eyes can no longer see. They're chopping the leaves before the machines come and actually take the whole crop. So they're just like this for hours with two machetes. There's no protective gear. You just have two machetes. And just seeing that for hours, I felt really connected to the concept of Ogum, cutting down the ties that bind. And so in developing a work looking at the Brussels sprout farmers, that's an element that goes into it. It may be a little abstract. You may not see it initially, but there's definitely these different elements that go into the work connected specifically to these very, very specific stories throughout history and through now.
Wow, thank you for that. Okay, we have time for a few more questions. Yes?
I have a quick question about the Indian dance.
Okay.
I guess I watched Indian movies 1 or 2 times.
Okay.
Compared to the Chinese or other culture, it seems like do people learn dancing like very young, men and women? And that was my first question. The second quick question is, I look at the costume, and then people expose the waistline. So do men look at it really sexy or what? I mean, I don't know who to ask until now.
I'm no expert on all of Indian dance. There's like hundreds of forms of Indian dance. There's regional, there's folk, there's now classical, which is a more recent formation. In kind of prehistoric, I don't know if that's the right word, in more historical forms of Bharatanatyam, then called Sudhir Atam, and generally in Indian culture or like that region, women didn't wear blouses. Blouse is a British word. So, that way of dressing, like the blouse was introduced by the British as a way to cover the women up. So So then notions of sexy kind of have changed over time, to say the least, based on that. I would say in the current day and age in classical dance, it's quite modest. And that is kind of because of that historical erasure, an attempt to de-eroticize the dance so it could be acceptable and proper for the Western view, if you may. But at the same time, Bollywood's done a lot to challenge that. If you watch Bollywood movies now, I mean, they're showing a lot. And I think that that's also a lot of influence from Western culture as well, like pop culture, and so Bollywood's really a mishmash. I can't say words. It's a mishmash of a lot of different cultural influences, for better or for worse, I would say. So in that sense, a lot of innovation or rule breaking can happen there. There are historically dances that were more prevalent for males to dance. I would say in the renovation of dance identity in India, that it kind of became predominantly women with male gurus. That's not fully the case, but I would say like percentage-wise. In America, I'm like one by one answering some of the questions that you said. In America, I would say a lot of young girls learn Indian classical dance as a way of learning about their cultural roots. So that's pretty common, but because we don't have access to the hundreds of types of dances, it's like predominantly the main classical dances which were propagated through the national identity of India. So that's Bharatanatyam and Kathak predominantly. There's also many other types of dance, but those are the most popular that a lot of children are encouraged to learn, but they usually stop by the time they go to college.
I think we have time for one more question, and the response should also be concise as well. Yes?
So first of all, thank you very much. Without all of you passing down the traditions and making innovations out of them, I don't think they will survive. So I'm really, I feel really thankful for that. And then my question is for things like Peking opera. I'm from China, by the way, which have so much history and culture behind that. How do we make younger generations understand them? Because there's so many elements that it feels totally. As someone growing up listening to Peking opera, I had no idea what it is, and I didn't feel connected. So my question is, how do we make it easier for younger generations to relate to the traditions?
Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Okay. All right, let's make we have Phillip, concise.
All right.
Sorry.
There is no concise response. That's a challenge, I would say, because even in Ghana, for instance, now Afropop is taking over. A lot of people are interested in the fast tempo movement, and it's even very difficult to keep up. And of course, some dance groups that were there, trying to do traditional forms, they also evolving gradually, gravitating into pop, because it's normally, now you're able to get some followership on social media. You're able to put some content over there. You get the money, all right? And perhaps before they were not getting the money, if they have to be in a group for traditional performance, they were not getting the money or the attention as they should. Now popular dance is global, so you get a lot of views, So it's actually changing the narrative. It's actually a challenge, right? And we don't know in the next 50 years whether these dances are going to, we're going to lose them, or they're going to be changed totally into something, or they're going to lose their relevance in society. That is a difficult question. And so for me, my class, what I do is just to advocate for that. For kids who are outside the culture, who are in the United States, in the diaspora, all over, it's actually even a bigger challenge, all right? So it's tough, I would say. I think it's just the current, dispensation and what we need and what we want and our artistic taste. Everything has been influenced by that. And so I've not seen any traditional dance person who has 1,000 followers and strictly doing traditional only. Perhaps there are, I don't know, but I don't see. People that I see are the Dance God Lloyd, the other African contemporary Afropop guys in the African continent who are actually making a living out of that, right?
Mm.
I actually understand your concern, but I think I'm Chinese too, okay, but from Hong Kong, so I'm kind of British, my background. My father was making as a producer and director in Hong Kong, and he has made 100 movies. I really cannot stand the Chinese opera because they already have to tape it first before they do all the movies, okay? So again, I really like even ballroom dance and bachata, okay? So it's really hard. I was teaching Chinese school, and it's not something that they force the kid to learn, the traditional Chinese opera kind of thing, or dance. So the parents can pay something to, for them to go to like after school class kind of thing. So I wouldn't use the word it's a lost art because I know in China they already try to like teach Chinese opera kind of thing. But to, like you say, to make them, do it like the old tradition, I don't think will happen. Okay, because they like, hip hop and everything else. Yeah. So I think, Anne may kind of say something. Anyway, because of my upbringing, I'm already a very old senior. Okay, all right, but I love the Western dance. Sorry.
Okay, I think that we are at time. On behalf of World Arts West, and I believe the audience as well, we just want to say thank you guys for participating in today's panel.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. I want to make a comment about culture, traditions, evolution. I have the privilege of being executive of World Arts West and an honor of working with hundreds and hundreds of cultural artists, generations of cultural artists and practitioners who are in this community studying dance, engaging in spiritual rituals for so many reasons. Sometimes it's because our parents tell us to, or for so many of us, it is, for so many of us, our dance classes is our spiritual space. I grew up with atheist parents, and dance classes and performances have been my this is where most of my friends come from, a sense of community. And sometimes dance companies run community cultural spaces that serve sometimes as a financial networking center, as we saw quite a bit during the pandemic, as a place for intergenerational gathering, as a place for spiritual practices, as a space where if you grow up in a country where the mainstream culture does not recognize who you are, is also often a place for us to be affirmed in our individual identity, learn about our history, and be able to plot our future. That's how cultural dance has been for me personally and for so many of us. Lastly, I'll say that it's very, very important for presenters like our organizations that are not rooted in any one singular culture to be able to bring these kinds of thoughtful conversations that are nuanced, that are not black and white, to the general public, so we can have a place where we're talking about these these topics that we care about or maybe know nothing about. At World Arts West, we're working to encourage, more presenters, more conferences to have these kind of conversations, and to bring these cultural dance forms such as the Afropop dance class right after to diverse audiences. And so, I just kind of want to say that on behalf of World Arts West. We want to hear, this is a new program for us, Artist Dialogue, so we want to hear from you, how you like the program, suggestions for improvement. Please come and talk to our staff. And we're always looking forward to hearing from you in order for us to shape our future programs. So thank you so much for coming. And lastly, if you like what you see, please make a donation and buy a t-shirt from us. Thank you. Thank you, speakers.